All right, welcome back to yet another video. This video is going to entail a little bit more dealing with methods. In my previous video, we just did some basic method stuff. We're going to do some more method stuff, but this time to show a couple of extra little things we didn't go over last time. So, first and foremost, I'm going to create a method here, define, and I'm just going to call it min or something. I'm going to give it, number 1, comma, number 2, like that. And what this is going to do is find the smallest of two numbers. Now, if, in this case, number 1 is less than number 2, which one's smaller? Number 1, right? So we return number 1. Else, else, if it's not 1, it's got to be the other, right? Return number 2. There we go. Now, if I were just to, print, let's just go min, we'll give it a 10 and a 4. Brace, brace, or parentheses, parentheses, there we go. Now, this is going to print the min of 10 and 4. So 10 gets plugged into here, 4 gets plugged into here. Is 10 less than 4? No. So it's not going to do this one. It goes to the else immediately. And in this case, it's going to return 4. So this should print off 4 on my screen. Oh, I got to save it first, of course. We'll call it minmax. All right. And 4 gets popped up on my screen here. If I change these numbers to 2, well then 2 being the smallest should pop up over here. There it is. Now, what if they're the same? 2. Well, if 2 is less than 2, return the first 2, otherwise return the second. So it'll return 2, but it'll return that second 2 in this case. Now, if we're doing a function or it mattered if they're the same, then we'd have to have a little bit more into our ifs. For us, I just want to know which of these numbers is the smallest. And if they're the same, well, just give me one of them. And this might be something we would do, a dozen, hundreds, thousands of times in a project. Maybe I have to find the smallest number out of like 100 things, but I'm going to do it constantly throughout my playing of what the program, project, game, or whatever it happens to be. Good example might be one of those games where you have equipment and you can click optimize and it picks the largest value and just equips that thing. That would be kind of similar, except this would pick the smallest value. Now, I've defined this thing here that will basically find the smallest of two numbers. So now I'm going to set up one more. And at that point, I'll let you guys pause and see if you can figure out the answer. So I'm going to set it up. We'll just call it min3. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Now, before we found the minimum of 2 numbers. And now you have to find the minimum of 3 numbers. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. One is kind of continue the way we did the previous one. The only difference here is you're going to need some bigger ifs. I can't just say if number 1 is less than number 2. Number 1 has to be less than number 2, and number 1 has to be less than number 3. And it actually might be better to say less than or equal to in this particular case. If we just leave less than, there is an odd case, since there's 3 numbers, of, one of the smaller numbers being like here and the other 2 numbers being the same, and it picking something different depending on how we write it. So it depends on how we write, but less than or equal to might be a little bit better. So what you're going to have to do here is, if you want to do it the long way, which is typically the way most people would do it, to be honest, you'd have to have if this is smaller and if this is smaller, basically, and you'll have to do that for each of these options here. There is a shorter way that can be done in one line, though. So I'll give you guys a chance to figure that out. So at this point, pause. Try to see if you can put this together. And it should work for any three numbers you put in there. All right, so take a few moments. Try to do it now. All right, I'm assuming you paused at this point. Or maybe not. Maybe you just wanted the answer. But we're going to go ahead and show you the two ways you can do this. Now, the first way is the way most people would probably do it. If number 1 is less than or equal to number 2, and number 1 is less than or equal to number 3, like so. If that's the case, I have to do that. Return, in this case, number 1. Now, what some people will do here is they will do something along the lines of this when they're writing this out. Just keep in mind, if number 1 is less than number 2 and number 3, that actually doesn't work because you have to have a true false on both sides. So number 1 less than number 2 is a true false. Is that true or false? Just saying number 3 on this side is not. You have to have the full statement here. Let's see. Elif number 2 is less than or equal to number 1, and number 2 is less than or equal to number 3. Right? Now, I would return, T, there we go, number 2. Now, there's only one option left, and that's return number 3. So this is the lengthy way you could do this. Now, you may think, well, it doesn't seem that long, but what if I had a fourth number? I'd have to have another and, comparing the fourth, another and. This one would be bigger, and the else would be bigger. So I'd basically go one more over this way and one more down. And if I had 10 numbers, I'd have to have 10 going across and 10 or so going down. This would just get progressively bigger and bigger. Let's test this real quick before I show you the short way. I'm just going to print min3. We'll go 1, 2, 3. And that should print off 1 being the smallest. 1. And if I change this to any other configuration, 0, 0, it should turn back a 0 for me. There we go. So it works. So let's talk about the short way to do this. I'll just make a new method instead of doing that. Def min3s. That's what we'll call it. Number 1, comma, number 2, comma, number 3. And what I'm going to do is return min number 1, comma, min number 2, comma, number 3. I think that should do it right. Yeah, there we go. That's the one-line version. Now, when you're doing a program, generally you want to break things into their smallest denominator. In this case, I already have a program or a function up here that compares two numbers. Well, what am I doing when I'm comparing three? Well, I'm comparing two at a time. This one is bigger than that one, and this one is bigger than that one. I can just use the smaller one that I've already built. So what ends up happening in this case, let's say I do print min3. We'll just go 19, comma 3, comma 20 or something. That should be 3. So if I run it, oh, I'm sorry, min3s. Let's make sure we do the right one. There we go. Run. And I should get 3, right? So what happens here? 19, 3, and 20. 19 gets plugged in here. 3 gets plugged into here. And 20 gets plugged in here. So it's going to return the min of number 1 and the min of number 2, number 3. So it's going to do the innermost first, which is, what's the smallest number? 320. It'll come up here, 3, 20, 3 is less than 20, return 3. This whole line here that I've got highlighted becomes 3. So then it's going to back out, return the min of 19, comma 3. It'll plug it up here, 19, 3. Is 19 less than 3? No. So it returns 3. So this whole line ends up saying return 3. So when we get here, it plugs it in, and that's why you get a 3 there. I toss some things up. It gives me that thing back because of the returns. So that's the short way. And honestly, either of these ways would work. It just depends on the person. Whenever you're writing a program, there's always going to be a trade-off for people, especially if you're working in groups. Most people could probably look at this and pretty much understand what's going on. But can you say the same about that line? That line is far shorter, far more concise. I don't have to write as much. And even if I went to 10 of these, I would just add a couple more numbers going across. This would just get progressively longer and wider until it was just like way over to the sides. But then again, it doesn't really matter what you pick a lot of the time, as long as it works, is what I usually tell people. So if you pick the more complicated one, as long as you understand it, that's fine. But keep in mind, if you're working with other people, they need to understand it too. So sometimes you might have to do it kind of the longer way so everybody else can be part of the team or do what they need to do. Depends on how you're working and what project you're doing. All right, well, anyway, this is just a quick rundown of a little bit more complicated methods, returning, having a method call another method. I'm sorry, function call another function. Old Java habits die hard. Uh, and then I can, do a little bit more complicated maneuvers within these, as you can see. So that's it. Any questions or anything? Feel free to let me